Subscribe before the evidence vanishes and the truth hits a dead end. The first light of Sunday barely touched Strongsville when a lone motorcyclist rolled past an industrial cul-de-sac and braked so hard his boots skidded. The building at the end of Progress Drive did not belong there, not in the middle of the road. Yet the car was buried in it, its hood folded like a crushed can, steam whispering from ruptured lines, windows gone, metal torn. Silence so complete it felt like a sound by itself. Officers arrived to a scene that looked less like a crash and more like an erasure. One officer cupped his hands to the shattered glass and shouted. No answer. Another swung a baton, spidering the remaining pane. Glass cascaded onto the asphalt. Two young men were motionless, one slumped in the front passenger seat, one pinned in the rear. Between twisted airbags and the smell of scorched rubber, someone saw it. The slow rise of a stomach beneath the steering wheel. The driver was alive. They cut belts, peeled back fabric, and rushed the survivor out on a board while the building's fluorescent lights glowed indifferent overhead. Crows lifted from the power lines and vanished into the pale sky. One officer, his voice unsteady in the bodycam audio, said what everyone knew but no one wanted to say out loud. Two were gone. A third, the driver, clung to life. Names began to surface in murmurs and phone calls that pushed through to hospital corridors. 17-year-old McKenzie, 20-year-old Dominic, 19-year-old Davon. In surgery rooms, trauma teams worked. In waiting rooms, parents learned the news in staggered pieces, the kind that land out of order, too sharp to hold. A mother buckled at the word deceased. A father paced in blind loops, as if walking the perimeter of a dream he was trying to wake from. An officer tried to be kind and was only honest. Speed was a factor. Drugs were found. The driver was the lone survivor. On Progress Drive, the morning thawed into daylight, revealing a track of evidence etched into the cold asphalt. Investigators knelt by faint scars that cut across the lane, then traced a hard right arc, a thread of trajectory that veered past a tree, clipped a sign, and ended in brick. A dead-end road, literally. No skid marks where instinct should have screamed. No feathered black crescents that say a human foot slammed the brake out of terror or remorse. Only acceleration, lineated by broken plastic and a trail of glittering paint, straight into the wall. In the hours after the impact, where concern should have been the only story, theories rushed to fill the silence. Maybe a medical episode. McKenzie had a condition that sometimes took her by surprise. Maybe intoxication. Maybe fatigue, distraction, an argument. No one wanted to say the unforgivable possibility aloud, and yet the physics of it pushed back. A driver doesn't go from cruising to nearly 100 miles per hour in a short, blind sprint to a brick facade by accident. A driver doesn't miss braking unless there's nothing left inside them but momentum. While the surgeons worked, detectives harvested a different kind of evidence. Security cameras on the factory buildings were old but faithful. One captured a small silver shape turning onto Progress Drive at 5:59 a.m. The car glided into frame, calm, almost casual, until it wasn't. In the space of heartbeats, the shape lengthened, blurred, and lunged as if pulled forward by an invisible hand. The final frame froze on a smear of white light. The soundless impact lived only in the imagination. Back at the hospital, grief forked in two directions. The parents of Dominic and Davon were led into a room where official words became a kind of weather. Cold fronts of facts, high-pressure systems of procedure. Where? How long? Who found them? The answers were precise and useless. Across town, McKenzie's parents learned their daughter had survived because of a seatbelt, the only one buckled in that night. Depending on where you stood, it was either a miracle or a choice with a shadow. By afternoon, the case split into its own lanes. Traffic detectives plotted speed calculations on paper. Patrol officers knocked doors, asking the same question in different kitchens. Did you hear anything around dawn? A thud? A screech? A person crying out? Many shook their heads. The factories were staffed overnight. Machines hummed under fluorescent lights, a kind of white noise that drowned the moment the night broke. In the fog of those first days, the town did what towns do. Candles appeared on a sidewalk. Photos bloomed on a memorial page. Dominic with a full smile that always looked on the verge of laughter. Davon, a quiet strength in his eyes. McKenzie, smiling in frames that felt like they belonged to a different world. The consensus tilted toward tragedy. Maybe a bad stretch of road. Maybe drugs and sleep and youth and the kind of false invincibility that makes the worst decisions feel like dares against the dawn. But the evidence inched forward, stubborn as frost. An officer viewed a second camera that caught the approach from the cross street. The car didn't drift, it committed. Another measured the curve where the tires bit the curb just enough to adjust course around the tree. A calculation in black rubber that said control, not chaos. A detective ran his finger along the building's sheared brick and found a clean surgical slice. Intent hides in thin lines. What confounded everyone was what came next. After surgeries and casts and pain medication, McKenzie healed. Sympathy in the community bent toward her, the only survivor, a teenager who would carry this wreck through every day that followed. But the detectives noticed what pain sometimes reveals: patterns. On her phone's camera roll, there were ordinary things: friends, selfies, snapshots of a life. There were also small, jagged edges, videos from late-night drives, a speedometer needle dancing where it didn't belong, a clip of laughter when a tire kissed gravel too hard and jumped, distractions, smoke, lids lowered on eyes that should have been listening to the road. None of it proved anything. It only shaped a silhouette around a question no one wanted to answer. So the investigators went looking for clearer outlines. They spoke to friends who'd left the party early, ordinary kids with the kind of memories that felt suddenly weightless and heavy at once. Someone mentioned a fight earlier that month. Someone else remembered a text that didn't sit right. A sibling recalled a near crash on a highway shoulder, pushing, shouting, the steering wheel a hostage between two people who loved each other in a way that looked more like war than a promise. What they needed wasn't gossip, it was a hinge, the kind you can place on a table between grief and certainty and feel the world tilt. It came in quietly, as these things sometimes do, hand-delivered to the station in a grief-crumpled envelope by a family that wanted to understand how their son's last minutes had been spent. Dominic's phone had been recovered from the car. The screen was shattered, the battery wouldn't hold charge, but data is a ghost that survives. A tech warmed the device under a lamp, coaxed it to life, and pulled the cloud. There, tucked between playlists and screenshots and done memes that made better sense a week ago, was a video recorded 10 days before dawn broke against brick. The thumbnail was astonishingly ordinary. A hallway door, paint scuffed near the handle. Voices bled through the frame the way arguments always do. Too loud for the space they're in, too close to say they aren't serious. Investigators crowded shoulder to shoulder in the small digital forensics room, the air as taut as fishing line. The playhead hovered over a gray triangle. Across town, the factory road sat empty again, its end wall perfectly repaired, as if nothing had ever altered its quiet. In the hospital, a mother pressed her daughter's hand and told her to sleep. In a living room, a father stared at a photo he could not put down. The tech tapped the screen. The clip opened, shaky and raw, as if the phone had been held in a pair of hands that didn't know what to do. A female voice, familiar now to the investigators from hospital hallways and intake forms, cut through like glass dragged across tile. Steady, certain, and frightening in the way certainty is when it points at you. "Open this door," she said, the camera tilted at the knob. "Open it right now, or there's going to be a serious problem." The room went so quiet that the whine of the hard drive became the only sound. Somewhere down the hall, a detective's desk phone rang twice and stopped. In the lab, no one moved. The timestamp on the recording glowed from the corner of the screen like a small, cold truth. And before anyone could say what they thought they were hearing, before anyone could decide whether this was anger or omen, the video scrolled to its next saved clip, a fragment of something recorded days later, and the investigators saw, line by line, the path of a car that had traveled that same dead-end road not once, but again and again, like a rehearsal for an ending no one believed was possible.
The video on Dominic's phone became the line between tragedy and intent. Investigators watched it frame by frame. McKenzie's voice, measured, angry, was unmistakable. Her words weren't those of a panicked teenager. They were commands. "You think I'm joking? Open this door right now, or there's gonna be a serious problem." The detectives replayed it, each repetition sharpening their understanding. This wasn't an argument caught in passing. It was a snapshot of control, of a girl who wanted to be heard and feared. When the video ended, the silence in the room was almost reverent. They didn't yet have a crime, only a pattern. They began to map her world. Friends, ex-boyfriends, social circles, text messages, every fragment of communication that could reveal who she really was when no one was watching. The picture that formed was jagged and contradictory. Some saw McKenzie as radiant, magnetic, the girl who could make a room brighter. Others described her as volatile, sweet one day, venomous the next. One name kept resurfacing: Tyler, the ex-boyfriend before Dominic. When investigators found him, he was quiet at first, his eyes somewhere between anger and disbelief. "She's not right in the head," he said finally. "She told people she could put spells on Dom, said she used his hair, made a doll. She believed it. She said he couldn't leave her." The detectives wrote it down, not because they believed in magic, but because obsession leaves fingerprints even when it hides behind superstition. Each interview deepened the unease. Friends mentioned how McKenzie had begun to change after her 17th birthday. More impulsive, darker jokes, an appetite for danger. She'd race cars at midnight, flirt with near misses, laugh about the way fear made her feel alive. When someone crashed their car at school, she had said, "If I ever die, I want it to be fast, no time to think." Detectives built a timeline. In the weeks before the crash, there were small explosions, public arguments, deleted messages, late-night calls. Dominic tried to end things, then reconciled. A friend remembered him saying, "She scares me sometimes." Still, everything was circumstantial, until the digital evidence spoke louder. The forensic techs pulled McKenzie's phone logs. GPS data painted a story no one expected. She had driven the same stretch of Progress Drive 7 times in the week before the crash. Same route, same abrupt end. She stopped before the wall each time. Never once did she turn right or left onto a connecting road. She was rehearsing. When detectives compared that data with her final route, the path matched perfectly, right down to the second turn before acceleration began. Meanwhile, her recovery drew public sympathy. A girl surviving what had killed her friends made for an easy headline. On social media, people called her the miracle driver. Others sent prayers, digital flowers, messages about destiny. But for the families of Dominic and Davon, each post was a blade. Dominic's mother couldn't stop replaying the last voicemail from her son. His father avoided sleep entirely. "It doesn't feel like an accident. My boy wasn't supposed to die like that," he told the press. The pressure mounted on investigators to say something, anything, but all they could offer was patience. They had the video, they had GPS data, they needed motive. Then a new witness came forward, a boy from the same party the night of the crash. He remembered something small but chilling. At one point, she told someone she'd drive until the car couldn't anymore. We thought she was joking. Back at the precinct, Detective Anders, lead on the case, flipped through printouts of McKenzie's texts. In one, days before the crash, she had written, "If he leaves me, I'll end it. Maybe I'll take him with me." The room went still. There it was, the hinge. Anders leaned back, staring at the photo pinned to the board. The mangled car, headlights fractured into 1,000 points of light, the building's bricks still indented from the force. It wasn't the image of chance, it was choreography. Yet the final piece came from a more human place. A hospital report noted McKenzie was the only one wearing a seatbelt. The others hadn't buckled in. That single act had saved her life and cast doubt on everything else. If she intended to die, why strap in? The question became the case's moral riddle: intent versus impulse, rage versus reason. For weeks, detectives sifted through contradictions. She told one friend she blacked out, another that she remembered every second. She cried in some interviews, stonewalled in others. When asked if she had been fighting with Dominic that night, she said no. But her phone showed messages deleted right before the crash, texts with him. One fragment recovered by digital forensics read simply, "You'll see." By the end of October, the picture was undeniable. The prosecutors reviewed the evidence and ordered a formal homicide investigation. McKenzie's status shifted overnight from survivor to suspect. But news travels fast in small towns, and she learned before the warrant was ready. Neighbors saw police cars pass her street, lights off, moving slow. She'd been online earlier that day, posting photos in designer clothes, makeup perfect, captioned, "Still breathing." That night, Dominic's family received a flash drive in the mail. No note, just a copy of the same door video, unedited. Whoever sent it wanted to be sure no one forgot what she said. Detective Anders sat alone at her desk after everyone had gone home, the glow of the computer reflecting in her coffee. The phone logs, GPS coordinates, surveillance stills, all of it pointed in one direction. But what haunted her was the timing. Why crash now? Why there? The answer arrived with a single call from a friend of McKenzie's. Her voice shook. She told me she wanted it to be over before her 18th birthday. She said she couldn't handle turning into an adult with everything falling apart. Anders wrote it down and circled the date, July 31st, 2022, 2 days before McKenzie's 18th birthday. The crash wasn't a coincidence. It was a deadline. At dawn, a gray mist rolled over Progress Drive again. The building's repair crews had already fixed the wall. The scars were gone. But the asphalt still bore faint shadows of burned rubber, like the ghost of a decision that could never be undone. In the police evidence room, the car sat under tarp, silent as confession. And somewhere across town, an 18-year-old girl scrolled through her phone, convinced she had survived the worst. She had no idea the real reckoning was about to begin. Because in just a few weeks, detectives would find the one piece of evidence that stripped away every excuse, her own recorded route data,
proving she had practiced the crash 7 times before impact. And with that, the case would no longer be about an accident. It would be about intent, obsession, and the terrifying simplicity of a plan that started with love and ended with acceleration.
The morning of November 4th was colorless, the kind of Ohio dawn that seemed to exist in grayscale. Detective Anders pulled into the driveway of a suburban home where the air already trembled with the quiet hum of marked cars. Inside, the house was still, curtains drawn, a dog barking somewhere behind a closed door. She walked up the path, warrant folded in her hand. When McKenzie appeared in the doorway, she looked smaller than anyone expected, barefoot, hair pulled into a loose knot, a gray sweatshirt hanging off one shoulder. Anders didn't draw her weapon. She didn't need to. "McKenzie Shirilla," she said evenly, "you're under arrest for 2 counts of aggravated murder." The girl froze, her lips parting but no words coming out. Behind her, a parent's voice rose from the kitchen, confusion turning to disbelief. A mug shattered on the tile. "Please be careful with the bracelet," McKenzie said softly as the cuffs clicked shut around her wrists. At the precinct, reporters began circling the story like vultures. The headline was simple and cruel: teen crash survivor charged with murder. But in the interrogation rooms, it wasn't sensational. It was clinical, procedural, cold. Officers cataloged her jewelry, her phone, her belongings. The same phone that had recorded her threats, mapped her route, and carried the proof of intent in its digital veins. Anders watched through the observation window as McKenzie sat under the fluorescent hum, her expression calm, almost detached. "She's not scared," one deputy whispered. "She's waiting." In a separate room, Dominic's parents sat with a grief counselor, their faces drawn tight with years they'd never lived to see. "We just want to understand. We just want to know why." The answer, when it came, wasn't the one anyone expected. The trial began in the summer of 2023, a year after the crash that shattered Strongsville's quiet illusion of safety. The courtroom was packed. Locals, journalists, students. Everyone wanted to witness what had really happened on that road. McKenzie entered in an orange jumpsuit, shackled but poised. Her eyes swept the room, landing briefly on the 2 empty chairs left for Dominic and Davon's families. The prosecution opened with the data. A screen flickered to life, showing a map traced in red, a straight line down Progress Drive, 7 identical paths over 7 days. This is not coincidence. This is rehearsal. This is intent. Then came the video, the one recorded on Dominic's phone 10 days before the crash. The audio echoed through the courtroom, the sound of a girl's voice vibrating with anger. "You think I'm joking? You open this door right now or there's going to be a serious problem." In that moment, silence became something physical. Even the camera stopped clicking. The defense countered with a story of confusion and collapse. They painted her as a child with a fainting disorder, a victim of trauma, a girl who had lost control behind the wheel. "She loved them," her attorney said. "This was an accident. Tragic, yes, but not murder." But the evidence didn't love her back. Experts testified about her car's data recorder. The accelerator had been pressed to the floor for over 4 seconds before impact. No braking, no hesitation, just pressure. Consistent, deliberate, final. Then came the autopsy reports. 2 young men, both unbuckled, both with injuries from impact so violent that only one seatbelt could have made the difference. Hers. The prosecution leaned forward, voice steady. "If you were losing consciousness, how did you strap yourself in?" McKenzie didn't answer. When Detective Anders took the stand, she didn't dramatize. She described facts. The rehearsed drives, the deleted messages. The friend who testified that McKenzie had said, "If I can't have him, no one can." She paused only once, when asked how it felt to arrest someone so young. She said, It felt like stopping the story before it got worse. The jury never came. McKenzie had waived her right to one. She wanted a judge, one person, to decide her fate. After 3 days of testimony, the judge delivered the verdict. He spoke slowly, voice measured against the weight of the room. This was not reckless driving. This was murder. McKenzie's face didn't move. She didn't cry. She didn't plead. Only when the sentence was read, 15 years to life, did her shoulders tremble slightly, as though she'd been waiting for a sound only she could hear. Outside the courthouse, the town exhaled a year's worth of tension. Some said justice had been served. Others whispered that nothing could bring back what was lost. Dominic's mother placed a single flower on the courthouse steps before walking away. Reporters asked for Anders' comment. She refused. But inside her office, she stared at the wall where the case photos had once hung. The crash site, the digital map, the last messages. All gone now, filed away. Only a blank square of light remained. She poured herself a cup of stale coffee, sat down, and opened a new case file. Another disappearance. Another mystery waiting to pull her under. The world doesn't stop when justice arrives. It just resets its countdown. Weeks later, the prison released an updated intake photo of inmate A79214, McKenzie S. The smile she once practiced for social media was gone. In its place was something quieter, stranger. Not remorse exactly. Maybe relief. In Strongsville, the building on Progress Drive had been repaired. Fresh paint covered the cracks, new concrete filled the impact scar. But at dawn, when the fog hung low and the first shift workers arrived, they swore they could still hear the faint hum of an engine in the distance, revving once, then stopping. Because some stories don't end with verdicts. They echo, endlessly, down the roads we thought we'd already forgotten. And for those who follow them, one question always lingers. Was it rage that drove her forward, or the terrifying freedom of knowing there was no turning back? If you think this case was chilling, wait until you see the next one. Subscribe before the next story pulls you into another roadside mystery where the truth doesn't break, it accelerates.